considering how we got something accomplished that's, I think, very progressive. But I do have one question on the overtime of $95,000 for fiscal year 2014. How much of that do you think was Festival on the Trails?
I don't know off the top of my head, but when I get back to the office,
Just a guess, what would you say?
I'm not gonna guess.
Okay.
Because it depends on which officer and what the rate of pay was, and how many hours they worked. I do have that number, but I'll have to get it from the office.
Okay, I'm just curious because, again, that's an expenditure that's, could be considered economic development, you know, community branding, whatever you want to call it, and these kinds of small expenditures do add up. So we've made choices to support this kind of festival, and I'm just saying, we ought to know what those numbers are, and then maybe we won't have these last-minute discussions on things like how to cut $235,000.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion Harrison, second to adjourn. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, we're adjourned. Oh, but
That's
wait.
right. Oh, sorry.
but urban agriculture and urban farming.
Yes.
Mike?
Are we at the podium?
Sure.
No, you don't need to go to the podium.
No, you
Well, that's what he's asking, but we need to give it to him.
Yeah.
So,
What kind of direction are you
Yeah.
looking for?
Well, I think, the main issue that's driving all this is the
Chickens?
interest in chickens. So, given that it's the interest in chickens, I think it's important to know that people can apply for approval to keep chickens.
Yeah.
It seems like it's hitting a nail with a sledgehammer because it requires a special use permit by the governing body.
Yeah.
Currently, there are no standards that would tell someone what's acceptable. So they submit an application, we review it, it's pretty open-ended, and then the decision is there's so much discretion involved that there's probably too much discretion. And the process is pretty heavy for what you'd be asked to consider.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there direction to explore something else? I think that in staff's opinion, there's a lot of, well, let me just back up. This is fairly trendy right now, and it has been for a few years. A lot of cities have written ordinances to relax the standards for urban agriculture. It solves a problem for probably not that many people, honestly. Not that it's not important, but there are also some risks involved. So, while it might sound like you can control roosters, in reality, I think that's been difficult for cities to do that. While it might be seem like a really neat idea to have a few chickens and raise your own eggs, what happens 3 years down the road if you don't really want to do that? What do you do with the chickens? You let them go, and now you have chickens running all over town. You have feral chickens.
That's what happens to the cat.
And if you go,
Open carry.
people that are used to living on a farm, maybe 3 generations ago, they were used to taking a chicken at the chopping block, cutting off their heads, and cooking a chicken in a pot. People, that doesn't appeal to people. So, there are a lot of things that sound good, like a good idea, but there are something called unintended consequences too. So,
So you're saying right now, Mike, that if an individual wanted to have chickens, they could just apply for a special use permit today, and they could do it.
they can go through the process, apply for a special use permit. I think the way we would look at it is we would look at what other cities are doing, make a recommendation, placing conditions on it,
Sure.
and
Would it be easier if you had a policy
Or an ordinance.
or an ordinance?
But before you go there, really, can't we address the most needed thing right now, which is where can you have a garden? I mean, because right now, any garden I don't think anybody here finds a garden offensive, however, technically you can't even have a garden without an approval, right?
Not necessarily. I think that a garden is just if someone came to me and said, is it legal to have a garden? No, it doesn't say specifically you can have a garden in your yard, but it's an accessory use. It's a customary accessory use.
Mhm.
But if someone said, let's say someone decides to plant a vegetable garden that covers their entire front yard.
I think we need
And,
more ordinance.
and then their neighbor complains, and I look in the ordinance,
There's nothing there.
there's nothing here. Now, when they got their building permit, before they got their certificate of occupancy, they were required to sod their front yard. But what if the house was built in 1975? So there's nothing, I mean, this is a minor issue, but that's a simple fix. I mean, that's just a simple paragraph in the ordinance to fix that.
Mhm.
I could bring something like that back, and that would probably almost go on consent. I mean, it's such a simple thing. But the whole chicken thing, you know, maybe what you would like us to do is keep the process the way it is. That is, it goes through a special use permit, but we at least have some standards.
Mhm.
Or maybe it's a permit that's issued by the community development director with some standards. That way you don't have to, it doesn't take the
See,
time and the effort.
I would almost go that route and make it under the discretion of community development with
Right.
I mean,
The thing is,
Well,
even with all the setback requirements, 99% of the time, people are not gonna
They're not
qualify
gonna
for
go-
it in a
If
residential.
If we make those requirements, I mean, it's up to us to make those requirements.
Yeah, but
Yes.
I mean, why are we even going there? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I love that it's in vogue, and I think it's neat for people who live on farms, but we don't live on farms here. We live on 10,000 square feet of yard space or less. And all you're gonna do is you're gonna introduce an entire level of complexity in your office, and then all those things are gonna come back to us. I mean, does everyone remember the pony in Parma, the Parma pony? I mean,
Blazer.
yeah, I mean, remember how much upheaval that caused throughout the city? And that's one animal that should have never been allowed. You're talking about chickens, you're talking about all of the feces that's washed into other people's yard. I mean, it's going to be a mess in more than one way, in my opinion.
And just so you're clear, I'm not recommending that you do that. Those are really your options. There are those concerns, and some of that you might be able to control through an annual license issued by the police department. But is someone going to comply with all of that?
And who's gonna do it? I mean, do you wanna send somebody out, a uniformed officer to tell people, we can't even keep, stray dogs, from running around, and now you've got chickens to also police? I just don't see how that's a priority for the majority of people.
What's other council members? thought?
Sorry.
No,
I really think it's served best by, the same way that a traditional building permit's handled. It's a lower cost investment as opposed to a special use permit. They're able to follow below, often the application process. We put the restrictions in place on the number and type of birds that are allowed. And if someone wants to have that, then they certainly can. But then when you have those pieces behind it from the type of bird and number, then you have enforcement opportunities. And if they try to violate that, then that's where, now the flip side of that is maybe we shouldn't encroach this until we have a fully funded animal control officer that's able to tackle this, because it would fall into their jurisdiction. So maybe, you mentioned earlier with the different beasts, putting the cart before the horse, maybe that's really where we need to focus on, that is funding the animal control to look at this piece. But I know Larry wants to dismiss it as something, but sustainability isn't a trend. I don't think it's going away in any fact. People are leaning more onto that lifestyle and understanding that the Earth's resources aren't infinite supply, and if they can lessen their footprint, that they're going to continue to do so. Some will get in and some will get out, but then some will maintain that lifestyle. So to dismiss it is a little bit disrespectful.
I agree with Steve. I think it's something viable we need to discuss, and maybe we haven't had that many people apply because $300 for a special use permit, and there's a lot of steps. I mean, and there should be some, I agree there should be a permitting process, but maybe we need to rethink it. $300 seems kind of high.
Do we have direction for staff, or are we just needing to